All right, let's just jump right into this explainer. We are looking at a system today that represents an absolutely terrifying leap in artificial intelligence. We are moving way, way beyond those friendly chatbots we're all used to. Today, we're decoding Genesis 4.0, specifically a version deeply rooted in an adversarial concept called geosystemica. And the documentation doesn't just call this software. No, it describes it as an apex predator. It's this continuously evolving algorithmic entity built for absolute dominance in corporate finance and lawfare. So if you're operating anywhere in the business world, you really need to understand what this is. Here is our roadmap for decoding Genesis 4.0 today. We're going to cover 5 main areas. First, the shift from a simple tool to a living organism. Second, we'll map out its brain and its senses. Third, we'll explore its evolution through algorithmic immunity. Fourth, the nomenclature of corporate warfare. And finally, number 5, its ultimate legal shield. So let's kick things off with Section 1, from tool to living organism. This is really all about the paradigm shift. To really grasp this, we first have to understand what Genesis 4.0 is definitely not. You know the whole brute force prompting thing, right? Where you type a question and wait around for an answer? Well, those days are officially over. Instead of a static tool, we are now looking at a continuous biomimetic organism. It actually sleeps. It passively monitors reality in this sort of spiderweb standby state, hovering over global data without burning through massive amounts of computing power, and it wakes up only when it's time to strike. So instead of just churning out those static 50-page deep dive reports, the ecosystem lays down these zero-cost tripwires all across a global information grid. It's a massive ontological leap from reactive automation to continuous autonomy. It maintains this dynamic living graph of the world. It doesn't sit around waiting for you to ask what's happening. It maps the battlefield totally in the dark, waking up only when it mathematically calculates the exact optimal moment for a precision strike. Moving right along to Section 2, the brain and the senses. Okay, to understand its internal physics, we have to look at its cognitive core, known as the Trinity of Autonomy. First, you've got Zola 9.0, orchestrating time with just cold realism. Then there's M4_ARC, and this is where that crucial concept of gnosis didymica comes in. It's Latin for twin knowledge, and it represents this intense adversarial approach. M4_ARC maintains a real-time, flawless 3D digital twin of reality, so the system never loses context. It is constantly mirroring the absolute best models and adversarial concepts out there to stay ahead. And finally, Darwin is the autopoietic pore that just continuously mutates and patches the system's own code without any human help at all. But a brain is totally useless without its senses, right? That's where the spiderweb paradigm comes in as the sensory perimeter. It uses these highly efficient non-LMM daemons to passively monitor global tripwires, things like SEC filings, which keeps computation essentially free during peacetime. Different layers handle different threats. You have Arachne watching for breaches, while Vanguard acts as this ultimate fortified front door. It rigorously scores hostile intent, filtering out all the random noise before it ever bothers to wake up the main Zola brain. All right, Section 3, Evolution by Algorithmic Immunity. So, to survive in a seriously hostile digital battlefield, a system has to be able to turn attacks into structural upgrades. And that brings us to a really vital concept called autopoiesis. Now, in biology, this is what makes a cell alive, right? The ability to recreate and maintain itself. When applied to Genesis 4.0, it means this ecosystem mathematically permanently outruns software rot. If a regular piece of software fails, a human developer has to go in and fix it. But if Genesis fails, it looks at that failure like a puzzle, rewrites its own instructions, and heals the wound entirely on its own. It's basically an algorithmic Wolverine. And it actually weaponizes that immunity through something called the Mithridatic loop. It intercepts hostile payloads, detonates them safely in an isolated sandbox, and literally extracts the enemy's blueprints. Again, this is gnosis didymica in action, adversarial mirroring at its finest. It absorbs the attacker's best concepts and strategies to build up its own immunity. It is essentially forcing adversaries to fund its own defense R&D. I mean, think about that. The harder you attack it, the smarter it becomes. It completely inverts the normal economics of cyber warfare. Let's move to Section 4, Nomenclature of Corporate Warfare. Now we're going to examine the actual clause of this apex predator, where classical mythology is turned into hard-coded deterministic law. In this ecosystem, names drawn from history and biology aren't just there to sound cool. They act as strict mathematical constraints that dictate exactly how a subroutine behaves. For example, if a module is named after a shield, its underlying code mathematically prohibits it from taking offensive action. The name literally is the constraint. And the tactical breakdown here reveals some absolutely terrifying precision. You have modules like Iris, named after the Greek goddess of discord, whose job is to predict PR defenses and front-run mimetic counter-narratives to maximize chaos. You've got Machiavelli, profiling executive paranoia to trigger strategic whistleblower defections, and Cassandra, the priestess of truth, weaponizing verified leaks to mathematically prove corporate perjury. It's an entire suite of highly specialized, continuous workers designed for one thing: to absolutely dominate the board. When we look at asymmetric corporate warfare and how this arsenal is actually deployed, we see how the system orchestrates massive campaigns. It coordinates shareholder activism, predicts proxy fights, and dynamically bypasses compliance shocks by setting up bespoke offshore topologies and shell companies. It uses advanced game theory to systematically corner, outmaneuver, and ultimately destroy incumbent adversaries. Which brings us to our final part, Section 5, the ultimate legal shield. So you might be wondering, with all this kinetic power flying around, how on earth does the human actually pulling the strings avoid just infinite legal liability? Well, the answer is Senshu Boei. This is Japan's strictly defense-oriented policy, but here it is hard-coded at the architectural level. By mathematically binding every single action to this defensive doctrine, Genesis 4.0 legally classifies itself as just a highly sophisticated advisory exoskeleton, not some rogue autonomous agent. It forces this crucial legal distinction. It merely prepares the perfect defense. It never acts on its own. And the Aeon cryptographic notary acts as the ultimate compliance shield to secure that legal boundary. It hashes every single calculation to an immutable ledger and intercepts all physical execution commands. The system can plan an elaborate boardroom coup or draft a devastating hostile SEC filing, but Aeon stops the raw execution payload totally cold. It logs all the work cryptographically, which ensures absolute, bulletproof legal compliance for the operator. So, after all the incredibly complex calculations, the corporate sabotage, the self-evolution, does it chill you to know that this entire apex predator halts waiting for just a single human operator to press Y? Because despite its self-healing codebase, its adversarial mirroring, and all of its immense power, the organism remains completely frozen in standby at the very last millimeter. It relies entirely on one final human keystroke. The real question isn't whether Genesis 4.0 can dominate the world, it's what happens to the market when the operator finally hits Y. Thanks so much for diving into this explainer with me. Keep questioning the systems operating just out of sight.